You're listening to the Hidden Coffee House podcast. This isn't content, this is resistance. I'm Satagayan, teacher, advocate, activist, occasional actor, and academic. Today's guest is Thomas Harrison, author of Searching for Richard Nixon, Finding Refuge and Making a Home in Prince Edward County. His book takes us back to one of the strangest Cold War stories, the moment when Richard Nixon, then Vice President of the United States, tried to find a measure of calm and cover in the quiet of Prince Edward County. Tom doesn't just follow the paper trail, he listens to the voices that have carried this story for decades, showing how memory, rumor, and local history tells truths the archives can't. But I don't just know him as an author. We've shared the stage. In Shatterbox Theatre's production of The Crucible, he stood as Giles Corey while I carried Tituba and Judge Hawthorne. Now, in Cabaret, he brings Herr Schultz to life while I step into Ernst Ludwig. Together, we've played out stories of fear, resistance, love, and betrayal on the stage, and lived them night after night in front of sold-out audiences, with another 16 shows to come. We've even shared space at the Regent Theatre with the Kenhtè Paranormal Society, asking what it means for a place to hold its own history and its own hauntings. So this conversation is not just about Richard Nixon. It's about how people search for refuge, how history clings to community, and how performance and memory shape the way we understand ourselves. So we're sitting here with Tom Harrison. I'm so excited to have you on the show. I've been trying to get you on, and just schedules were dumb. But I'm really happy you're here because I've been reading your book, and I even had to reach out and tell you that your storytelling is captivating. And it reminds me of the times that we're riding in the car and you're telling me a story, and I get drawn in. Your writing is like that. And I'll sit down, I'll take a prep period, or I'll take some time and I'll go over it because I can actually take this book and I can connect it because it has so much local history in it. I can start using it for my classes. So I really appreciate you being here to talk about your book today, Searching for Richard Nixon.
Second. Hello, Sate. Hi, Andrew. Naiwan, thank you for taking the time to chat with me about this book. Thank you also for your very kind words. I appreciate that. I grew up in a place where there were people who told stories. So I'm not anywhere near the best of that group, but, like you maybe, I was exposed to that kind of narrative conveying of messages. And I'll apologize right now for the puppy dog that's barking in the background.
I might get a couple going on in the background too eventually. So,
okay. Yeah. So, it's funny because you're probably going to ask me about where it came from, but I'll go back even a little further than my usual interview story. And I'll tell you, part of it came about as a result of me doing a graduate degree, a PhD in law. And it was a very historical thesis that I was writing. And I grew more interested in the stories I was finding than I did in the actual, the actual thesis, the legal part.
Yeah.
And I tried to include as many of those in the actual document that I could, but I had a place for stories, and having been exposed to this as a young person and kind of always grown up with it. I started just writing stories. And so this came about, in its form based on that kind of approach.
Yeah. Stories, though, they're what make us up, right? We're made of stories. If we don't have stories, then who are we?
Well, that's exactly right. That's right. And that's, I think I quote that right at the beginning of the book, right?
Yeah.
If you look, I quote Thomas King, "The truth about stories is they're all we are."
Yeah.
Someone else said to me one time, I mean, that's civilization. Civilization is stories about, how we did this and this happened to us and how we got together with those people over there and we became family, and how we didn't get together with those people over there. And that's why we're mad at one another.
Yeah.
And, that's why, and that is at the basis of, any technological innovation or culture or anything else. It's those kinds of stories.
Yeah, exactly. I had a student come in the other day and said, "Well, why is this like that?" And I'm like, "Well, let's take a step back and look at the story." Hey, and then going back through the history of it and telling the story about it, and it was
Well,
about the language signs, right? How come
right.
there's only those so many here and there's so many some other places? So yeah, it was a good conversation that came from stories.
Well, that's exactly right. And I can tell you, like I had teachers, you're a teacher in school. I used to teach that level or more or less that level at one point too. And having been through it myself, I can tell you, I actually learned more from the teachers. You used to think we were just getting them off track and, they would tell a story and then we didn't actually have to do school. Right.
Yeah,
But, there were some teachers who you would do it and they would just let you do it.
yeah,
I actually learned more from them than I did from the ones that were like, oh no, we're going to just study the subject, whatever it is.
right. You need
Because
to,
it was like, you had a respect for their capacity to deliver, uh, you know, a tale that had a structure that was important.
yeah, exactly. Like I'll let them go off and tell a story, and a good teacher can always connect that back to the content, you
Yeah.
know? And it's all about how you build it and how you talk to them, and it's about those conversations that you can have, right?
Yeah.
So,
That's
yeah,
my students. One of the reviews I got, because I teach at Durham College as well.
yeah,
And so they write reviews that you see afterwards. And one of the comments was, you just be really careful when you're in his class because you have to be careful of what's story time and what's going to be on the test.
yeah, yeah. That's usually it. That's why, yeah, my students they have to listen because you don't know what's going to be there. Well,
Yeah,
we always go over everything at the end.
right.
Um, but on your book, Searching for Richard Nixon, you explore how a powerful figure sought refuge in a quiet Ontario town. So,
Yeah.
do you think Nixon himself found healing here, or was he simply just hiding out?
Well, I mean, that was the motivation behind the book, right? Well,
Yeah,
why, first of all, did he come? What did he do? Who did he meet? What happened? But then why did he come? Um, and he later said that I think there were a few different places where he described it. He described it as a weekend of sailing and golf, and I've described it as a boys' weekend because it was all men,
that's
relatively prominent figures
it
in
seemed
the
like that to me too.
yeah political scene. So it's like and they I suspect they were drinking too
Yeah.
because
So
Nixon was a
the vague memory of what happened in
yeah,
later
that's
years.
right. That's right. Yeah, and he had a addictions problem, Nixon, that was maybe not as apparent in the 50s, but he did overindulge, as did many, back then. He wasn't alone. Could it be because they were testing the Avro Arrow down off Point Peter, and that was a piece of secret technology that no one knew about? I don't know. I don't think so, but
Yeah.
possibly.
But
Could
he
it
was
be
the
that
vice president at the time, so it could be anything, right?
Well, and this is the other thing about Nixon. I say in the first chapter, he always had secrets he wanted to keep. There were always secrets. And, it wasn't unusual for him in later years to do exactly that. Send somebody on a clandestine trip
Hmm.
to a foreign country and negotiate a treaty to meet with China for the first time in 30 years, right?
Yeah.
Or, whatever it was, bomb Cambodia in secret. This was not an unusual MO for him.
Yeah, he
So
just like the description of him going throughout it, he was just a very odd man.
yeah, he really was. A working class guy who was also but very bookish,
Yeah.
like very bookish. And so, did he find healing here? Well, I mean, he made for almost a lifelong friend in the mayor of Picton.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting to me because when I started, I knew the story, and then I started finding out about all these stories behind the scenes, including a few that happen in the Bay of Quinte, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I had a picture of Nixon, and the picture I had didn't fit with some of the things I heard both here and in the bigger history. And so, what he found, I think, and what we see in the book, and this is, I think, one of the things I conclude at the end is he was a much more complicated figure than history gives him credit for.
Oh, absolutely.
And and he had this real personal way of dealing with people. Odd, but also like really surprising. You know, he meets a homeless man in Picton,
Yeah.
and
Tells his buddy to give him $5, like, or
yeah,
money.
yeah.
Like, what's that?
I mean, that's very odd, right?
It is.
And you
It's
know, he doesn't do it because there's a reporter standing there.
no, he just does it, which is like, how often does that happen, especially from somebody in that kind of a position? It's not common.
Uh,
It's
It's
odd.
unbelievable. It's unbelievable, and nobody's ever recorded this. I'm the first
Yeah.
person, other than the guy Herb Stone, who I interviewed, who's a resident who's still alive. He's in his 80s.
Yeah.
He came to my book opening. It was funny. He's like, so he's in his 80s. He's a smaller man, and of course, he's lived on that. He's dined out on this story for 70 years.
Oh yeah, you could tell through that conversation that you laid out in the book, you could tell he was,
Yeah.
yeah.
But he was thrilled. I said, and we've got some history in the book, as you say, lots of history and local stories, but we've actually got living history.
Yes.
One of the people who actually met with him when he was a small boy is sitting right over there. So a whole bunch of people in the newspapers and everybody went over and chatted to him. So he was thrilled, right? So that was great to see.
I love that. So, like, you did draw on a lot of oral history from the county
Yeah.
and a lot of locals there. Did you, or how did their memories shape the story differently than what you found in the written archives?
Well, so that's an interesting thing too, because so there's this story. The basis of the story is one that Nixon himself tells 15 years after the fact. He comes back to Canada in 1972 on a state visit, and he's put on the spot on his first night on the state visit at Rideau Hall in Ottawa. And he's asked to make some remarks, and they hadn't expected him to be asked to do that, and he wasn't really prepared. He didn't have notes. And so he just reached back into his sort of raconteur's bag of tricks and pulled out some stories that he thought might be interesting to the local crowd.
Yeah.
And so he tells the story in a certain way, but if you know anything about raconteurs and politicians who tell stories, you know that they will sometimes alter the details depending on who they're speaking to.
Yep. Your target audience, right?
Yeah, they don't get the saying. I say Nixon was a little like all those people who don't let the facts get in the way of a good story, right?
Yeah, I liked some of the comparisons to some current politicians.
That's right. I think it was, for entertainment's sake, for Nixon, whereas it may not be so much that's the case in the
current. It's just not funny anymore.
But some of the details, when I went back to try to confirm what he said in 1972, I go back and I found some newspaper accounts and I found the oral history. Some of the details didn't fit. They were different. Either they conflicted with one another or they didn't fit. And so I realized, it's a real insight into Nixon's character to see what things he's saying and how he acts. He tells the story in 1972, and he says twice in the speech, he says, I was on Lake Erie.
Yeah.
And he did it again. He did it twice.
Yeah.
And so he had a reputation for mixing up details. Even as president, he would do this all the time. And he would say things that just didn't quite make sense.
Yeah, because he mentioned that there was the Lake Erie comment, and then there was the Belleville comment.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. The bar.
Yeah.
I was do you want me to tell that story?
Yeah, tell that story. I like that story.
Okay, so when he's here in 1972, Canada and the United States had not had a good relationship up to that point. During Nixon's presidency, he and the prime minister at the time, who was another man named Trudeau, of course, Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre, didn't particularly see eye to eye. And Nixon in 1972, 1971 had done a whole bunch of things that may sound a little familiar. He imposed tariffs on Canada, 10% tariffs across the board. He withdrew the United States from some long-standing international institutions like the World Bank, right? So the United States was no longer backstopping the world financial system, imposing tariffs on Canada, and then he unilaterally threatened to end the Ottawa Pact. And so this caused great consternation in Canada, which is part of the reason they wanted him to come up for a state visit.
Right.
So by the time he arrives in 1972, he at least has realized that this is probably not a good idea with Canada. They're the biggest trading partner. They're the biggest customers for American goods.
Yeah.
And so it's really not a great idea. So he's actually trying to kind of make up with the Canadian audience and with Prime Minister Trudeau at the time. So he tells this little story, and I think it's an apocryphal tale to some extent, although, as it turns out, parts of it actually did occur.
Yeah.
He tells the story of going into a bar, and somebody recognizes him. And the way he tells it, he says that waiter has come over and says, "Excuse me, sir, are you the vice president of the United States? My friend and I have a bet, and I think you are." And he says, "You're not." And Nixon says, "How much did you bet?" And he says, $5. He says, "Well, bring your friend over here. He's the bartender. Bring him over and we'll settle the matter." And so he settles the matter. And then Nixon looks at his Canadian audience in 1972 and he says something like, I can't remember the exact wording, but something like, "So that all goes to say, sometimes we don't look as bad in person as we do from afar.
Yeah.
And it's we must never lose any opportunity to meet one another when we can, to try and maintain our relationships," right? And everybody applauds. All good.
Yeah.
Nixon's on side. He's happy to be here. He actually cancels the tariffs. He stops threatening the Auto Pact, and he makes friends with Canada again, right?
Yeah, I remember reading that quote, and I remember reading all of it, like, kind of in his voice in my head.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whenever I can't help it. Whenever there's a quote by him, it's just like in my head.
I have the same problem.
Okay, I'm glad
I've been watching clips for a long time of Nixon, so every time he says something, I hear him.
He carries a reputation of both tragic and a deeply flawed figure.
Yeah, for sure.
Did writing this book shift your own view on him?
Yeah, I think it probably did a little bit. I still am not I don't approve of, the illegalities, including a couple that people don't generally know about, which were probably even worse than the things they do.
Mm-hmm.
Treason, for example.
Right.
He attempted to sabotage the 1968 peace negotiations between Vietnam in order to damage his Democratic opponent in the 1968 election. If they had managed to resolve the Vietnam War, something like 30,000 Americans and 200,000 Vietnamese would have not had to die, right?
Yeah.
So this is illegal. It's
right.
a breach of the Logan Act. And he bombed Cambodia in secret. And then he did other things too. He used the FBI to hassle people. They used the IRA to do tax audits of people they didn't like. They had an enemies list.
Oh, yeah.
Like all the kinds of stuff that you're kind of seeing right now, the precursor to it is in Nixon, for sure. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, yeah.
So none of that is very nice. But, the other thing, though, is if you look at his record, he does a whole bunch of things that he generally doesn't get credit for. And people have largely forgotten in the face of the crimes and misbehavior, including.
I mean, they were pretty huge, though.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. But, he establishes the Environmental Protection Agency, and he does negotiate peace with China, opens diplomatic relations. He does negotiate the start of a strategic arms limitation treaty with the Soviet Union. He does do a number of things domestically, including reversing American federal policy around indigenous nations, right?
Yeah.
He was actually, up to that point, he decided that the American government had treated the Indians in the United States wrong, badly, and that he was going to fix that. And so, he was quite revolutionary. Without Nixon, there would never have been desegregation in American schools.
Yeah.
When he takes office, only 8, notwithstanding the fact, this is what we're worried about right now, right? That maybe the president will ignore court orders.
Right.
He might just go ahead and do something.
I mean, he's done it.
Right. Well, up until 1970 or so, there had been 16 years of U.S. Supreme Court orders saying you have to desegregate the schools, and it hadn't happened. Only 8% of schools had been desegregated. And that isn't just Nixon. That was Democratic presidents, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, people forget that, right?
Yeah.
They forget that these Democratic places, that side doesn't exactly, stop things.
Oh,
they might not necessarily start all of them, but they're not going to stop what's going on either.
Well, no. And up until Nixon, the Dixiecrat Democrats were big supporters of segregation.
Yeah.
So they were not on the side of the angels either. Right? But so Nixon decides, well, that's contrary to rule of law. like notwithstanding the fact that he broke the law,
Right.
that the Dulles White House under Eisenhower overthrew governments left, right, and center around the world,
Hmm.
right? Just they did this all the time.
Yeah.
Black ops, right?
Right.
He decides, no, it's contrary to rule of law, and he insists that federal forces enforce court orders. And by the time he leaves office in a few years, 92% of American schools are desegregated. It's 20 years after the court actually ordered that to occur. It finally does. And but only because Nixon was there. So, all these things, it's like, oh, okay, I hadn't really known that. And I hadn't really realized it. And then there are a whole bunch of lesser things that I talk about in the book too, of course.
Yeah.
But I think it did change. I think I have a lot of respect for it. It actually makes it even more tragic. You said he was a tragic figure, right?
Yeah.
Because, his capacity for delivering was really quite astounding from a political point of view. Even one of those things that I mentioned would have been for most leaders probably, a career-defining event.
Right.
Now, the career-defining event just happens to be Watergate, which was pretty bad, right? So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was pretty rough. So, you and we both shared the stage in The Crucible. You were Giles Corey, I was Tituba and Judge Hawthorne. And now again, we're in Cabaret sharing the stage.
Can I just interrupt you for a sec?
Yeah.
This makes 2 plays in a row where your character has been directly responsible for my death.
I know.
we're setting a pattern here, right?
Right.
Anyways, yes.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
Do you think acting influences how you tell historical stories? And does playing Giles Corey, who resisted authority to the death, shape the way you see figures like Nixon?
Oh yeah, I think so. At least some of it. I've only been acting for a couple of years, but I had a very strange thing happen in the first run of Crucible. Of course, we were at the Cape in Picton for 16 shows in November. Get your tickets now.
For Cabaret, yeah.
Yeah. But in Cabaret, I had something funny happen there. There's the character, I play a Jewish fruit shop owner, who probably goes to a concentration camp and probably doesn't survive the war.
Yeah.
And there's a scene near the end where I have to be, both optimistic in the future, which is kind of sad because, as the audience and the actors, we actually know what happened, right?
Right.
But then I also have to be sad about the breakup of a relationship on stage. And the way I would prepare for that is I would get in the head of the character and think about what probably happened to him. And of course, terrible images, right? And feelings and channeling the worst. And so, it would make for great acting. But and I could do it once a week when we were in rehearsal. But when I started doing it every night, by the end of that run, I was depressed.
Oh, yes.
I was like, oh, I can't wait till this is over. Like, this is and I'll tell you, I even had that feeling going into when we started doing the rehearsals.
Yeah.
So, that was interesting. I wouldn't say I was that kind of intensely insinuated into the character of Giles Corey in The Crucible, which is partly a story about Nixon, because it's a story of the McCarthy hearings in the 1950s, which Nixon was involved with, right?
Yeah.
It's basically just an analogy. But I think I start to think about when I write now, it provides me with more empathy, probably, because I'm thinking about what if this was a character in a play, some of the stories, or if I were to change it to that.
Yeah.
What would this character do, especially with creative nonfiction, because most of it is historical nonfiction, but some of it I had to fill the gaps in with supposings, right?
Right.
And so you have to you still have to make it has to be real. Even if it maybe we're not sure it happened, it has to be close enough, right? And so you really have to be in the shoes of the people you're writing about.
Right. So let's go back to Herr Schultz.
Yeah.
He's a man trying to hold on to dignity and love, and as the world is just absolutely crumbling and darkening around him, right? So Nixon also is a man caught between vulnerability and political collapse. Do you see the parallels between your stage characters and your writing?
Oh yeah, for sure. So you read the book. You'll know. At one point, I do a little poetry, and I was thinking of him as very much a Shakespearean tragic figure.
Yeah.
and I actually wrote something, and you may not have noticed this, but it's actually an iambic pentameter. I wrote a couple of pages of Shakespeare's soliloquy, or not Shakespeare's, what I imagine Nixon's soliloquy to be,
Yeah.
if it was a Shakespeare, if he was a tragic figure in a Shakespearean play, right? And so, and everything in that poem, everything in that writing is actually true. I
That's
based it on real
perfect.
things he said.
That makes it even more poetic.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that, because partly I was thinking about, could I create a screenplay for this book, by the way? So that maybe, you never know. Someday down the road, I might do that.
That's perfect.
So what was your question? Sorry.
The question was, it was just like, do you see the parallels between your
Oh, right.
stage characters and your
Yes.
writing?
So that's right. Am I writing? So I do tend to see things. I'm very much aware of narrative structure. I'm very much aware of it because I don't always trust it.
Yeah.
Because narrative structure has its own implicit biases. And so you have to be aware of it to avoid that as much as possible. It preferences conflict, for example.
Yeah.
Which, maybe not. It preferences closure and resolution, which, we know from our own lives, that is a hard and difficult thing to come by, right?
Yes, it is.
Stories end because that's more satisfying. But often in real life, things go on. So,
So
you still,
I'll just say for a second, I
yeah,
often wait for the end of TV shows and I
yeah,
don't finish the last episode.
right.
I often do that. I won't watch the last episode. I'll wait on it and wait on it, wait on it, and then I'll
Ah,
finally watch it. Because then it
is that
ends.
because you're holding it in? It's
Yeah.
still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like
it's like
because it's still
Schrodinger's
happening.
TV show.
Exactly. That's what it is.
Yeah.
That you and I also sat together for a paranormal investigation with the Kenhtè Paranormal Society at Regent Theatre. How do you
Yes.
see history and haunting overlapping?
Oh, well, we talked about that. You should, guys, your listeners should go and look up the YouTube video of that, because that was an interesting chat. So, I mean, actors channel, whether they mean to or not. They're channeling the spirits, often of people who are dead, and often the spirits of people who are dead, and in some cases may have been close by.
Yeah.
And so if it's not directly like the soul of that person, you're certainly channeling the energy to some extent, right?
Yeah.
And trying to get inside the head of the person. And so to the extent that the spiritual side is needed, I think, if you are going to give a performance where you are portraying somebody, you have to be kind of okay with whatever part of that person it is that you're trying to show.
Yeah.
And so, whether that's, I don't know. I mean, for some people, as I say, I had that weird thing happen to me with Herr Schultz,
Yeah.
where, and I know lots of people who were in that conflict, right? World War II. And,
Mhm.
so, all of that kind of feeling came through. And, it feels like when you're on stage and you're doing the acting and you're portraying a historical character, like we have in both those plays,
Yeah.
it's a real responsibility to try to get it right.
Oh yeah. It is.
Um,
It's almost daunting because of
yeah, that's
the
right.
characters and the roles that they carry. Even like with roles like Ernst Ludwig,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know,
Well, you had to
you
play a
had to,
Nazi, so.
I know, you had to be real comfortable with what that guy is.
Oh,
And it is like after we got done those shows last
yeah,
season, I was just wiped.
yeah, I
I
bet.
was like almost like displaced from myself because I had to remove myself. And when I walked into the Cape, it was Ernst. So yeah, after those shows, I got really disconnected and had to start finding ways where I could put it back together. So when we walked back into rehearsals again, started light, started really light, started kind of bouncy, kind of everything like that, because I know how dark it can get.
Well, so that's a really interesting play, and that's a really interesting take on it too, because I think I agree with you totally. I had that
Yeah.
similar experience. This play is not really a standard narrative either.
No.
It's supposed to be a good time where everybody's having fun, and that is sort of true for a while.
Right.
But then things turn, and it doesn't all work out.
No.
It actually goes really bad,
Oh
right?
yeah. I
Um,
love our director too because the ending that she put in there, Georgia did an amazing job. I love it.
yeah, no, it keeps everybody pretty quiet. I mean, I think
Oh yeah.
everybody's a little shocked. The turn is really relatively late, and even
Yeah.
still, there's some elements where it still seems like it might be a fun party time, in
Yeah.
Berlin in the 1930s, and then it becomes pretty clear. I think.
Oh
Uh-oh.
yeah. It turns dark fast.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
which
do you
is not historically inaccurate either, right?
no.
It did happen very fast. It
Yeah,
it
it
was
did.
amazingly fast.
It was fast. Like, yeah, it was very fast.
Yeah,
Um, so places like Picton, super historical town. Do you
yeah,
think
sure.
that Picton carries imprints of figures who passed through there?
Well, I mean, I can't say I've seen them, but I can feel the presence of people here.
Yeah,
You know, the archaeological records have evidence of habitation in and around the area back 13,000 years.
yeah,
So, I remember when I was younger, I lived under the delusion that there might be some place where, in where I was, not here, but somewhere in Ontario, that there might be a spot where a human hadn't stepped.
yeah.
Unlikely,
Right.
really
Yeah,
unlikely, right?
very
In the face of
unlikely.
that kind of evidence.
And in that
Um,
amount of time.
that's right. That's right. And so, and then I think about this all the time. If we've had 2 million years of human evolution, say for 100,000 years we've been more or less the kind of human we would recognize as humans,
Yeah,
how many stories were there? Like, we grew up sitting around the campfire,
yeah,
and there was no TV. Everybody told stories, or they
yeah.
sang music, right?
But there was communication of some kind.
Yeah,
And there
there was
was
things going on, or they did drama. They maybe did dance too, right?
yeah,
So, the stories are here, and you get bits and pieces of them sometimes. Sometimes they're just in a word, right?
yeah,
Kenhtè is one of those words.
yeah,
I talk in the book about the Kentucky Derby. We
yeah,
had some friends up from, I have Kentucky cousins. We had some friends up from Kentucky, and I said, that we're connected. And they said, what? And I said, oh yeah, this is a word that is a root word that is common in a number of different languages. And Kentucky and the Bay of Kenhtè,
yeah,
it's the same root word.
yeah,
They were like,
yeah,
what? Wow. They were kind of freaked out by that.
yeah. It's so cool. I love that. How does the act of remembering Nixon in Prince Edward County connect to the way communities like Tyndall remember, resist, and carry forward our own histories?
Well, that's a big question.
It is.
Yeah.
And the one that could answer it, I thought was you.
Yeah, you didn't tell me it beforehand either, so I could think of something. Well, I mean, listen, everybody has to tell their stories and retell the stories. And, the great thing about the oral tradition is it's not just about the past, right? The oral tradition in all cultures is usually about the present. And so you're emphasizing the connection between the present and the past and joining the two together. And then the other thing is, I mean, even it connects, it's not just about one person or one group of people. It's usually about the connection of somebody to the larger community, whether that's their family or their, larger geographical region, or to others, the others. And those are the stories that we talked about, right?
Yeah.
That's how you get civilization at the end of the day. And so, whether it's resisting or promoting culture, there has to be a place for all of the stories that people have. And, I'm always interested in, I'm one of those people who I recognize the seven basic stories, stranger comes to town, person goes on a journey.
Yeah.
And I'm always looking for that and how that comes in new forms. But then there are not, those are just the seven standards in normal narrative, but there are also others that don't follow that pattern at all. And that's also really interesting to me. And so when you get, something out of, Western literature where you have that narrative structure, it's again, narrative structure, right? The
Yeah.
narrative structure, people think it's neutral.
Yeah.
It's just a story. No, it's not just a
Yeah.
story. It's a story that's based in a way of telling a story that might be particular to culture, right?
Yeah,
And so there are different ways of telling stories too.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
this is also interesting to me. The
Like
stories themselves.
that was another thing that we were talking about with another one of the students was it was about stories, because they came up to me and they asked me, well, what does it mean in this story? I'm like, well, we need to listen to stories in different ways. And stories come to you usually when there's something happening. Like,
Mm,
so this particular story, I said, well, we need to look at it. What's really happening? Let's think about it logically, because there's so many mystical things that are happening in these stories, like, say, a bird that's flapping its wings and wampum comes down. Well, is that going to happen? Probably not, right? But what's the analogy? What is the story
right,
trying to tell you, right? And then he sits back and like, oh, okay. So goes back, goes through the story, recognizes what's happening now. So that's that connection between those past stories and then
right.
the context, the analogies, and how you can put them together to solve problems that you have immediately and move on into the future. So
Yeah,
to just sit back and be able to think about stories in different ways and to be able to listen to them in different ways, I think is really important. And then to be able to have the storytellers is also important.
right. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, even like young children know how to tell stories, right?
Oh, I love their stories.
Yeah,
The little ones that come in at recess and they're trying to
yeah,
tell you what happened. And
yep.
you try not to laugh, but
Or when you ask your daughter when she was younger about what happened during the day, and she's just like all
nothing.
excited or not or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm excited for Cabaret. Everybody
Okay.
needs to come out because I think that I'm pretty sure tables are selling out. Everything's selling out, isn't it? Again,
Yeah, I think we're getting close to 60% on the tables.
like we were
16
completely,
shows. We were of course sold out 3 or 4 weeks in advance last year,
yeah. And there was a
and we
waiting
had a
list of,
waiting list of 300 people
yeah.
who,
So
who didn't
those,
get tickets.
you
So
want to get
FOMO
tickets.
FOMO is not just an internet social media thing. It's what will happen if you don't rush to get your tickets as soon as possible to Cabaret.
Exactly. So come and see me put Tom to death one more time on stage. This will be what? So there's eight, however many shows from the Crucible, the last
Yeah,
eight that we did, and now
yeah,
16 more times. Oh, I'm sorry, man.
yeah. We'll have a schnapps sometime and
Have a
talk about it.
schnapps. All right, sounds good. You forgot to give me the first one.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, thanks, Tom. Thank you for
Okay.
coming on, and
Yeah, for sure.
looking forward to see you in rehearsals.
Niwa, see you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
That's my conversation with Thomas Harrison, digging deep into Nixon's time in Prince Edward County, exploring how memory lives in communities and bringing performance and history into one room. Nyawagoa Tom for joining me and for lighting new pathways through a story most of us never even knew was there. If you want even more, go see us on stage. Shatterbox Theatre brings Cabaret to life this fall in the Cape, fully immersed in Berlin's Kit Kat Club. It's 16 performances only, opening November 5th and running through November 28th. Step inside the chaos, the champagne, the music, the danger. We've transformed the Cape. You won't just watch Cabaret, you'll live it.